This is the first section of notes for Unit 8, and Unit 8 is focusing on the many different marine ecosystems. The first section notes, 8.1, focus on emergent coastal ecosystems, which would be those coastal ecosystems that are up out of the water, even though they're along the coast. They're growing along the edge of the landforms. They're emergent. Now, all coasts are highly productive marine ecosystems for three important reasons. First of all, they provide a lot of nutrients. There are plenty of nutrients because of river runoff and even sometimes coastal upwelling. There's plenty of light because coastal habitats are shallow, so they're always going to be in the photic zone. And there's plenty of shelter because so many salt-tolerant plants grow along the coast. There's shelter among the plant roots and within the plant systems themselves. So these plants are like a foundation for ecosystems. Now, human activities tend to have wide-ranging effects on coastal ecosystems, usually because the effects are varied and immediately at hand. And this results from people living close to the coastlines. We tend to live close, as you can see this nighttime satellite map of the United States. Most of the population or major cities are near the coast, so we have an immediate effect on the coast based on that. However, sometimes you don't even need to be near the coast to have an effect. The effects of things such as agricultural fertilizer or farming fertilizers have an impact on the ocean as well. So what you're seeing here is a map of the watershed of the Mississippi River. And all of the fertilizers that are used by farmers in the Midwest end up eventually in the Gulf of Mexico, and that affects the Gulf with eutrophication. So we can't always anticipate the effects that we have on coastal ecosystems. Now, the first specific type of a coastal ecosystem we're going to talk about is an estuary, which is a partially enclosed body of water with rivers running into it. So it's an area where freshwater and saltwater are mixing. As a result of that, they're highly productive and tend to trap lots of sediments which are rich in nutrients. Estuaries are important because they act kind of as a filter between runoff and the ocean. So they tend to filter out nutrients, excessive nutrients, and also pollution. Estuaries also serve as important nurseries. Now, a nursery is a place where juvenile fish grow up in safety. They can avoid predation. So in estuaries, you often will find the larval forms of many pelagic fish such as tuna and swordfish and such. In fact, 75% of commercial fish species, these would be the ones that we fish for commercially and eat as, you know, like in seafood restaurants and so forth, they grow up in estuaries. Estuaries are also an important ecosystem because they contribute to the productivity of other ecosystems. They produce so many nutrients and larvae that they basically, the juveniles, when they survive to adulthood, migrate out into the open ocean, or perhaps they migrate to a coral reef. And again, there's so many nutrients produced in these estuaries that as the rivers flow out into the ocean, they bring more nutrients out to the open ocean, where phytoplankton can use them for productivity as well. And as we mentioned, they reduce pollution and runoff, so they kind of act as a barrier or a protection for other marine ecosystems. Now, another ecosystem is called a salt marsh, and they tend to be closely associated with estuaries. This is an area where there's very little tidal, wave activity, so they're usually very still, and they're usually dominated by salt-tolerant plants. So they occur on low-energy coastal environments in temperate regions, and they are flooded by the tides daily. So sometimes they'll be full of water, like you see here, but other times they'll be without any water and be extremely muddy. These, of course, as was mentioned, are dominated by salt-tolerant plants. The foremost one is called Spartina, which is a type, or commonly called cordgrass. This can live in saltwater because it actually concentrates salts within its roots, and that just allows water to naturally osmose into the plant. Now, these also will get rid of excess salt from the leaves by simply secreting them, and you often will see that these have salt crystals growing on them. Pickleweed, or Salicornia, is another type of plant that dominates here, and it has a different strategy to protect itself from salt water. It basically puts all the salt that it collects into one leaf, which kills that leaf, but the leaf just falls off, so the rest of the plant is protected. Now, the soil within a salt marsh is usually very rich in what we call humus, which is partially decomposed organic matter, and this is why there's such lush plant growth in this area. It's also why it tends to be somewhat stinky in these areas because of decomposition. Taking a look at this map, I just wanted to show you a few things. First of all, the area of salt marshes. Salt marshes are outlined in green, so they tend to grow in temperate regions. So if we zoom in here, you can see along the coast, just basically in our area, we have got all this area. In the Jacksonville area, we have salt marshes. But we're also in an interesting transition zone because the red represents the growth of another type of ecosystem called mangroves. So we're kind of in the middle between where we have a lot of salt marshes, but we also have mangrove forests. Well, let's talk about those. Mangrove forests are dominated by trees called mangroves. And these are, as was mentioned, found in the tropics and the subtropics. They have various adaptations that allow them to live in saltwater, and of course in mud that's anaerobic, which means it has no oxygen. Take an example of this would be the red mangrove, or Rhizophora, which grows on stilt-like roots called prop roots. And these allow it to get oxygen to its roots, but also hold the plant above the waterline. Avicennia, or the black mangrove, is interesting because it has pneumatophores, or snorkels, that stick up from its roots to get oxygen. And the white mangrove basically doesn't live in the anaerobic mud. It thrives high on the tideline, so they don't need any of those special root adaptations that we've been talking about here. Now, mangroves have two important characteristics that make them the basis for this ecosystem. So mangroves, because they have these roots, these prop roots, make a nice network of habitats for juvenile fish to grow up. So they act as important nurseries for coral reefs. And the root systems also hold soil into place, which helps to reduce coastal erosion. So this is why it's illegal to rip out or tear down or cut down mangroves in counties in Florida, because they are essentially reducing coastal erosion. Now, switching gears here a little bit, another type of habitat is the rocky shore, which is in the intertidal area where solid rock predominates. There's 4 challenges to living in such an ecosystem. One is desiccation, because during low tide there's no water and you have the threat of drying out. Secondly, thermal stress, especially during the summer when there's no water, air temperatures can be higher and you can dry out because of the sun. High wave impact. Waves aren't crashing onto gentle beaches, they're smashing into rocks. And also, as you can see in this picture, there's extreme competition for space. Things clamor over one another trying to find the best spot to live. Rocky shores tend to be common along tectonically active places near active volcanoes and along faults where there's earthquake zones and such. Now, the beach, which is what we're used to in our area, is basically a shoreline composed of loose sediment or unconsolidated sediment such as sand. Sand protects the coastline by reducing the impact of waves. So whereas the beach may erode, the landmass itself is somewhat protected by this sand barrier. And the beach also has physical and organic processes that help to break down organic and inorganic materials. So in other words, it's kind of like a filtering agent. So beaches are important for many different reasons. This last slide, I would like you to write down these questions, because these are the questions for the video that you need to watch now. The video is, there's a link for it on the website, but also you could just type in the address you see up there in blue, and you would need to answer these 10 questions that review the notes that we just discussed here.